Hi, I'm Mark, and today I have to talk about Suella Braverman's newest race-based plans. In the fight against the sexual exploitation of girls and women, the Conservative British government will in future focus more on the ethnic background of the suspects. For too long, political correctness has kept us from weeding out despicable criminals who exploit children and young women, said Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. And Home Secretary Suella Braverman specifically targeted men from Pakistan as perpetrators. The government's focus on British Pakistani men is nothing more than state racism, said Cambridge University sociologist Ali Megji. The question of ethnic background is not in itself unusual in Britain and is routinely asked in surveys, but also on government websites. And now the data collected by the police is also to be used by a new task force that is to take up the fight against the grooming gangs, as the organized abuses are called. We will stop at nothing to root out these dangerous gangs, said the Prime Minister, who himself has Indian roots. Sunak and Braverman made a demonstrative visit to the town of Rochdale on Monday. The place near Manchester is in Great Britain, like Rotherham in Northern England, a synonym for organized abuse. Between 2008 and 2010, several men from Pakistan had abused dozens of mostly white girls and forced them into prostitution. According to conservatives, the fact that the perpetrators remained unmolested for a long time is due to fears of discrimination allegations. The reason that tips from social workers, local politicians, or even the police were ignored was cultural sensitivity and political correctness, said Sunak. Above all, Braverman, whose ancestors come from India and Mauritius, did not mince her words. There is a predominance of certain ethnic groups, and I say British Pakistani men whose cultural values are completely at odds with British values. Oh, that's what the Conservative hardliner said on Sunday. And these men would see women in a degrading and illegitimate way. The minister claimed that the importance of ethnic background was being ignored, particularly in regions where the opposition Labour Party governed. In 2024, there will be elections in Great Britain, and the Tories are far behind in the polls, and that's why they are putting up a stunt like this. Critics accuse Braverman of using her language to incite hatred of minorities, and it's not the first time that the Home Secretary has been approached for her language. Just a few weeks ago, ex-soccer star Gary Lineker tweeted that the government's rhetoric was not dissimilar to that in Germany in the 1930s. This was aimed at Braverman, who had dubbed the rising number of irregular migrants an invasion, for example. And even now the criticism is considerable. Sociologist Maggi referred to the government's plan to deport unwanted people as quickly as possible, regardless of their circumstances. They will use the myth of brown sex offenders to gain support for their anti-migration and anti-refugee policies, is what he told the German press agency. The child protection organization National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the NSPCC, also warned that there is an increased risk of blind spots due to the focus on a certain type of offender. It's important to remember that sex offenders don't have just one background, said the NSPCC chief Peter Wenlis. Opposition leader and Labour leader Keir Starmer said the ethnic background of suspects should not be an obstacle to investigations. However, he emphasized that this does not play a role in the overwhelming majority of sexual abuse cases. And Maggi also said government data shows that so-called grooming gangs are mainly led by white men. The Home Department Commission studies also found that most sex offenders convicted of organized child molestation are white men. There is no evidence that grooming gangs are more Asian or black. A government spokesman said on Monday that there simply hasn't been enough data to draw any clear conclusions. If there is a study and the majority is white, then that is some data to draw some conclusions. And nevertheless, that's another thing I mentioned in my video this morning. The government is looking for another scapegoat. If they were still in the EU, they probably would blame the EU for anything that happens there. And in this case, the police in that area might not have done their job when there was alarms from social workers, etc. And it will not have to do with political correctness or whatever. If that was the case, we wouldn't see so many racial discrimination from policemen all over the place. And the other point is, the data show that the majority is white men. I said this, and even here in my hometown, unfortunately, we had arrests last a few years ago for a lot of cases where children were abused, and all of those, they were all found, but unfortunately it happened in my hometown, but they were all found all over Germany, and all of them were white men. So just to say it's one ethnic group is really ridiculous. And just to blame one group that is, and I have to quote Lineker there when he talked about the invasion, picking out one ethnic group and to blame them for certain behavior, and especially this behavior, that is something that in Europe, in the Middle Ages, the Jews were blamed for killing children, for molesting children, and they were the targeted, that was a targeted thing then at the time to blame the Jews for this. And the Germans in the 1930s and 40s did exactly that, blame the Jews for a lot of things, that because they needed one enemy. And that is something the British government does now, picking out one ethnic group, blame something like this on them without database to base the whole thing on, and blame them because they need an enemy, and they know that they are hardcore voters, and some of the Labour voters, unfortunately, are falling for crap like this. And that is the only reason, the upcoming election, for doing this. The fascists from the AfD here in Germany are doing exactly the same, and they're doing this all the time. And the votes they get in parliament and the votes they have at the moment in the polls is just the kind of people and the number of people that falls for things like that. And that the Tories in Britain are now what the fascists of the German AfD are, is scary, to be honest. They are the governing party in one of the important countries in this world from economic and military strength. And that is really scary. And if that would work in the campaign at 24, that would be even more scary. And I have, at this point, I really have to say this again. Usually, and in the distant past, I would have been on the side of the Tories. Even in school, I was a member of the Conservative Party here in Germany. And I was sided with the Tories at that time, because they are kind of our allied party in the UK. But what the Tories are doing nowadays, I would expect from UKIP, or generally Nigel Farage, but not from a normal Conservative party. And that is really scary. But to get it back a bit on the light side, I forgot something this morning, because today is Wednesday, and Wednesday is book day. And on the Outside Views book channel, there is another book review today, and this time it's a column of Fire by Ken Follett. This time I picked a historical fiction novel for the channel. If you're interested in books, just have a look. I'll see you there. I'll be back.